If I had wings, I'd just fly away. Fly up past the moon and the shining stars and see all the things in Old Nan's stories, dragons and sea monsters and the Titan of Bravos. And maybe I would never fly back unless I wanted to. Arya Stark has long had a passion for dragons, and thanks to Game of Thrones, they recently released a teaser that shows Arya's first meeting with the dragons. In this video, I do want to discuss that quick promo, but I also want to compare the introduction of Jon Snow to the dragons as well as Arya Stark. We all know that a dragon needs a rider, and towards the end of this video, I want to mention a leak that may paint a clearer picture about this teaser. As always, here's your sign and let's begin. Before we get started, please slap a like on this video as the like goal is going to be 1,420. Also, make sure you're subscribed, and then this is the most important part. Make sure you have your notifications turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a Game of Thrones video throughout this long night. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the very first thing that popped into my mind when watching this teaser was the comparison between Jon Snow meeting Drogon and Arya meeting Drogon. The main difference here is that Jon Snow is half Targaryen. It's in his blood to ride dragons. His family, well, half of his family anyway, has tamed dragons for hundreds of years. Targaryens actually used to put dragon eggs in the cradle with their young babes. And when Jon Snow met the dragons in Game of Thrones Season 8 episode, the Game of Thrones Season 7 episode 3, that shows you where my mind's at, he was clearly scared as hell. He ducked down as if someone was about to drop a massive load of poo over him as they flew by. Arya, on the other hand, not so much. She looks as if she wants to go jump on Drogon and ride him off into the sunset. I think the biggest difference here is that when Jon Snow was going to meet with Daenerys for the very first time, he was unaware of her power. He had heard rumors that there was a dragon around or that she controlled a few dragons, but until that time, he had never actually seen one. Also, he hadn't exactly been claws deep in some dragon tame by that point, so he didn't really know how the interaction or the initial meeting with Daenerys was going to go. Thanks to Sansa and the Lords of the Vale, Jon had it in his head that Daenerys was not someone who could be trusted. So this is, in my opinion, why he reacted this way when he saw Drogon for the first time. And things are different this time around. Jon Snow has made an alliance with the rightful ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. And by this point, I'm sure Arya heard that if it wasn't for Drogon and Rhaeghal, then Jon Snow would have died north of the wall when he was going to get that white to show to Cersei. I imagine what shortly follows this scene will be Arya walking up to wherever the dragon lands and attempting to touch it. This will inevitably cause Daenerys and Arya to get off on a good foot. Remember Daenerys' reaction when Jon Snow called her dragon's lovely beast. To her, they're her children. So the fact that Arya is going to be so awestruck and fascinated by her children is, in my opinion, going to mean that Daenerys is going to take an immediate liking to Arya. And now that Jon Snow's back, I think Arya's defenses are going to be let down a bit. She played the game of faces with Sansa last season, so she now, for the most part, any doubt she had in her heart about the remaining members of her family wanting what's best for House Stark is all mostly gone. Of course, she's going to play the game of faces a little bit with Daenerys, but it's not going to be anywhere near as extreme as last season, where we thought she might slit Sansa's throat. Now, another thing that I want to point out from the teaser that I think is pretty interesting is the fact that last season, Jon Snow mentioned to Daenerys that it would be smart if they arrived in the north by horseback and then rode on horseback to Winterfell. From this image, it looks as though Daenerys may not be on her dragon, but she did let her dragons fly into the Winterfell courtyard. When we can quickly see the people behind Arya backing up as Northerners traditionally would because they're superstitious people, the walls behind them can clearly be seen as Winterfell's gray stone. So this makes me wonder what made the plans change. We do know that traditionally when a new season of Game of Thrones starts up, in the first episode at least, it picks right up where the last season left off. So if their plan was made not that long ago, we can only imagine maybe a few weeks before this, or however long it takes them to travel from Dragonstone to the north, what caused their plans to change? In my opinion, that could really only be one thing, and I want you guys to let me know your opinion down below in the comment section, but in my opinion, that's because the Night King resurrected Viserion and took down the wall. So that urgency or that need to get to Winterfell quickly in order to prepare its defenses is more precedent than scaring a few northern folk. I wouldn't be surprised if Jon Snow and Daenerys are actually on the back of Drogon, and they've just been CGI removed from this trailer because the editors deemed it too spoilery. And to me, that would make sense. If Jon told Daenerys Daenerys they should arrive in the North together, then the two of them arriving on the back of Drogon would show the North that Jon and Daenerys are together in this alliance, and the fact that Arya gives this little smirk at the end kind of makes me think she's seeing Jon Snow for the first time, and he just looks so badass on the back of his new dragon, rocking with his new queen. Now, another thing that I want to go over is something that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, was that dragons need a rider. I've said this at the end of season 7 when the Night King resurrected Viserion. The only reason why Viserion was taken out was because he didn't have a rider. The rider on the back of a dragon, and this is why Targaryens tame them and rode the dragons and just send them off on their own, is because the dragon needs that human mind to help it maneuver in the air. The only reason why Drogon didn't get hit was because Daenerys was on the back of him, pulled to the right, which immediately made Drogon maneuver himself in such a way as to not get struck by the Night King's spear. Now, it took 5 seasons for the dragons to get large enough for Daenerys to hop on the back of one of them and take off. It will be 3 seasons since then. Rhaeghal has long since been large enough to ride. The only reason why it hasn't happened is because the need hasn't rose yet. Daenerys has never lost one of her dragons, and for the most part, her and Drogon have been able to take care of whatever enemies lie in front of them. That's because she's never faced the army of the dead. Until last season, of course. In Game of Thrones Season 8, I predict that there will be multiple different enhancements that will be made in regards to the dragon department. The CG is going to be a lot better, and the increased budget will likely allow for insane things to happen, such as another person other than Daenerys mounting a dragon. I also feel like they may include some sort of armor for the dragon. In the Field of Fire 2.0, when Daenerys has about 1,000 arrows hurling at her, the look on her face right before Drogon turns and shows his underside, which ultimately blocks all the arrows, Daenerys looks as though she doesn't know what she's going to do. So that, along with the Night King stabbing one of her dragons in the shoulder with the spear, makes me think that she's going to want to include some sort of armor on these dragons. Experience makes knowledge, and she's now seen what it's like to have her dragons unprotected in the wars to come. Imagine if Gendry is the one who's tasked with doing this. He could rid some of the sins of his father by helping to serve one of the rightful heirs to the Iron Throne, that being Daenerys. And as a matter of fact, according to one of the leaks that was sent to me through the DMs over on Twitter, speaking of which, make sure you go follow me at Sir_Hunt, a person mentioned that Gendry doesn't necessarily form armor for the dragons, but rather a saddle. Right around the time I was sent that information, there was this leaked picture that randomly appeared on Instagram. Now, before you get your hopes up, this is fake as shit. This is clearly Jon Snow riding his horse from the Battle of the Bastards. The person didn't even do that good of a job of photoshopping. Even though this image is fake, that doesn't mean that we still don't have a small chance of Jon Snow hopping on one of these bad boys. We haven't even really seen him get on Drogon. He was gonna do it in season 7, but then he wanted to make sure that Daenerys and Drogon don't get overrun by the whites that were surrounding them. Now, what's interesting to me is the person that sent me that information mentioned to me that the saddle was extra large. It looks as though it was meant to fit 2 people, and the undercoating that covers certain vital spots on the dragon is actually made of Valyrian steel, because this is the only thing they can guarantee that will be able to block a spear from the Night King. Now, what that most likely means is that Drogon could be equipped with a saddle in order for 2 riders to mount him. The problem is, Drogon already rescued like 4 people last season and there was no mount involved. But if you'll remember, someone almost slipped off that dragon. That person was Jorah. Perhaps if this leak is true, which it's most likely not because most of them are meant to be taken with a grain of salt and are purely for entertainment purposes, but if this leak is true, perhaps Jorah suggests to Gendry that adding some sort of extra width to the mount would make it easier to not fall off when you're in the air. And also, since we're on the subject of leaks, I was actually sent one more recently that involved Jon Snow commanding the walls of Winterfell during a massive invasion, and Rhaegal lands near him. Jon realizes that the only way for him to escape the situation alive is to jump on the back of Rhaegal. Now, that leak does have a bit more information to it, and I've, for your convenience, leaked it down below in the description, so go check that out if you have some time. Now, before I get out of here, I do want to quickly mention some information that was recently brought to us in George's most recent A Song of Ice and Fire novel, that being Fire and Blood. And one person pops in my mind when I saw this trailer, aside from, Jon Snow when he met Drogon, and that is Arya Targaryen. She is a Targaryen of old, not that long ago, but about 50 years after the conquering of Aegon of the 7 realms, well, 6, Dorne came into the fold later. Arya Targaryen was a young girl whose family lived in King's Landing for a while, but then her mother moved them to Dragonstone, and just sort of super summarizing this for time's sake, she got bored with Dragonstone and basically hated it. And while she was living there, Balerion the Black Dread, who's actually Aegon the Conqueror's dragon, she decided one day to go and try to mount this dragon. When she did this, she disappeared. No one really knows exactly what happened to her during the time that she was gone. Her mother thought that she might have gone back to King's Landing because she hated living at Dragonstone, but that was not the case. When she came back, she had burns all over her, and long story short, she had fireworms, or at least the theory anyway, is that she had fireworms living inside of her. And it's noted that upon arrival, Balerion was suffering from a great wound on his back. Now, Balerion the Black Dread was the largest dragon, and still to this date is the largest Targaryen dragon to ever have existed. So the fact that he was so badly wounded makes everyone, or makes the mystery surrounding Arya Targaryen so much greater than what it actually is, of the fact that wherever she went, and a lot of people speculate it could be Old Valyria, was something out there was able to wound Balerion. Now, that part of Fire and Blood alone doesn't necessarily, the end of it doesn't necessarily relate to Game of Thrones Season 8, but the fact that there was such a heavy theme in Fire and Blood about female dragon riders makes me think that George was putting that in our heads so that way, if someone like Arya were to mount a dragon next season, it wouldn't be that much of a shock. The main way that I could see this going down is two words: pure necessitation. Arya will be nearby to a dragon, and the only way that she will be able to escape is by jumping on the back of one. The dragon will probably be freaked out, but it'll ultimately be able to sense Arya's energy and realize that she is not a threat. Now, to reiterate, I do think that it's more likely that Jon Snow will mount Rhaegal because Jon Snow's father is the dragon's namesake, and arguably he's the one character who is the closest to Daenerys. They consummated their relationship last season, and Drogon could definitely sense the Valyrian blood in Jon Snow. They were sort of setting up the fact that maybe Jon will one day either ride Drogon or Rhaegal. But the way Arya reacts in this teaser makes you think that she's going to be the one to do it first. And one more thing before we get out of here, do you all think that the Northerners who are behind Arya in this image, and they're basically freaking out over the sight of dragons, do you think that their fear is going to play a bigger role in Season 8, and maybe this will cause some of the Northerners to ally themselves with Cersei? Maybe even some people like the Knights of the Vale? They are the ones who strongly oppose the Targaryens, and I don't really know if Daenerys showing up with her dragons in full force next season is going to make them want to stay around. And if that's the case, well then the Night King's likely going to pick up a few new soldiers for his army. Alright, and with that being said, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this video. The like goal is going to be 1,420. Please, make sure you're subscribed, and then, this is the most important part, make sure you have your notifications turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a Game of Thrones video throughout this long night. Super special shout out to every single person watching this video, and a special thank you to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. I want to thank you all again so much for watching. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunts Reviews.